Why did the night sky have to burn the way it did? The sirens wailed across the desert, shrill and merciless, and every Marine inside the wire of Iron Creek knew what that sound meant. Mortars came down in a rhythm that rattled the bones, slamming into concrete barriers and shaking dust loose from the rafters. Tracer rounds carved jagged red arcs across the black. It was chaos, a living storm of fire and metal. Inside that storm, one figure moved, small, steady, unnoticed by many until the moment that would change everything. She stepped into the open with an RPG balanced on her shoulder, a single silhouette against the fury of a truck roaring toward the front gate. That truck carried death. Dozens of lives would end in seconds if it broke through, but her steps did not falter. She fired. Flame consumed the desert. The world went silent. Who was she? How did she reach this impossible moment? The answer didn't begin here. It began years earlier in a quiet town that had never heard the sound of war. Texas was a place where cattle grazed against the horizon, where dirt roads stretched endlessly under the weight of the summer sun. Carter grew up in a weathered farmhouse on the edge of those fields. Her world was the smell of dust, the creak of porch wood, and the low hum of her grandfather's stories. He wasn't like the other men in town. His back was bent with years, his hair silver, but when he spoke, there was steel in his voice. A Marine once, decorated with a Navy cross, he never told her about medals or parades. He told her about men who didn't come home, about the silence that followed gunfire, about holding the line because someone had to. Would sit on the floor by his chair, listening to every word. She asked little. She learned more from what he didn't say, the pauses, the weight in his breath, the way his hand lingered on the coin he always carried from Vietnam. In those silences, she understood. Strength was not loud. It was quiet. It was standing when others had already fallen. The ranch was her training ground long before she knew it. She carried hay bales larger than herself, sweat stinging her eyes as she forced them across the barn floor. She sprinted after stray cattle until her lungs burned like fire. Her hands blistered, her shoulders ached, but she refused to quit. Out here, there was no applause, no encouragement, just work, and pain, and the decision to keep going. By 18, her choice was already made. She didn't want the ranch. She wanted the eagle, globe, and anchor pressed against her chest. She wanted to stand in the same line her grandfather had once stood in. The day she drove to Sand to sign her name, her jeans were dusty, boots worn, voice steady but soft. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Mitchell, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp. He had seen dozens come through, some broken within weeks. He studied her like a man testing steel. "You're not very tall," he said at last. His voice was flat, almost dismissive. "Boot camp chews up everyone, but especially someone your size." She didn't blink. "I've worked 16-hour days in 100-degree sun. I don't quit when it hurts. I won't quit there either." For a moment, silence. Then a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. He slid the papers forward. "Sign here, Carter. Let's see if you're as tough as you think." Her pen didn't shake. That was the first step. Boot camp on Island was a furnace built to break people. Days began in darkness and ended in exhaustion. Shouts ripped through the air, boots slammed mud, lungs screamed for air. Recruits dropped from runs, knees buckling, arms trembling. Was not the fastest. She was not the strongest. But when others collapsed, she stayed upright. When her arms quivered under push-ups, she locked her jaw and pressed on. When her feet blistered raw, she laced her boots and marched. They tried to tear her down with words, with insults spat inches from her face. She said nothing. Silence became her shield. The other recruits noticed. Slowly, a nickname grew, whispered in the barracks. Graduation came with banners snapping in the wind and families cheering from the stands. Stood in formation, not in the front, but steady, unbroken. Her grandfather was there, saluting quietly from the crowd. Their eyes met only once, but the pride in his gaze was worth more than any medal. Her first assignment was not glamorous. Camp Westfield in California, logistics, the 17th Battalion. She learned to count crates by weight, to drive forklifts through narrow alleys, to log shipments of ammunition, fuel, and bandages. Every mistake could cost lives. Some respected her discipline. Others dismissed her work as paper-pushing. Corporal was the worst of them, a wall of muscle, tattoos snaking down both arms. He mocked her whenever he could. "This isn't a playground for women," he muttered once as she passed. She didn't reply. Her silence only fueled his anger. Instead, she volunteered. Sandbags in the rain, heavy crates in the heat, long hours when everyone else had already gone. Actions were her answers. She remembered her grandfather's coin, the weight of it in her pocket, the voice on the phone reminding her, being a Marine isn't about strength. It's about standing when others fall. Months blurred into routine. Early mornings, late nights, sweat, exhaustion. Then the announcement. The 17th Logistics Battalion was deploying overseas, Afghanistan, forward operating base Iron Creek. The name hung in the air like a sentence. Some cheered, eager for combat. Others packed in silence, fear hidden behind steady faces. Sat on her bunk, lacing her boots than ever. She touched the coin, whispered 2 words, "Don't quit." The transport plane roared to life outside. The ground shook with its engines. The desert waited, merciless and unkind, and Carter was ready to step into it. But she had no idea what the desert would take from her, or what it would leave behind. Why did the desert feel like it was waiting for something? The sun climbed over the ridges, burning white by noon, and every breath tasted of dust. Afghanistan was no place for illusions. The heat stripped them away. Forward operating base Iron Creek stood like a scar on the landscape, concrete walls ringed with razor wire, watchtowers starring out over endless sand. The ridges beyond were quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that never felt safe. Convoys rolled through the gate at all hours, engines groaning under the weight of supplies. Helicopters beat the sky overhead, chopping the air into dust storms that blinded eyes and clogged lungs. Inside, Marines lived in rhythm: eat, patrol, unload, repair, repeat. But under it all ran a current of unease. Everyone knew the enemy was watching. The ridges weren't empty. Somewhere beyond them, rifles glinted and eyes waited. Carter was assigned to the logistics nerve center. She wasn't out on patrols, but her hands moved across maps marked with pins and routes, lines that meant the difference between survival and disaster. She learned patterns when ambushes struck, where convoys were hit, what roads looked safe but weren't. She caught details others overlooked: the timing of roadside bombs, the subtle shifts in enemy movement. Lieutenant Daniel Spencer began to notice. Before every convoy rolled out, he asked the same question: "Which route today, Carter?" And more often than not, her answer saved lives. But Corporal wasn't impressed. He leaned against the wall after one briefing, arms crossed, voice dripping with disdain. "Paper shuffling doesn't make you a Marine. Real Marines fight outside the wire." She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the maps, her hands steady. The silence was her answer. 3 months passed this way. Convoys, calculations, whispered tension. The desert air grew heavier every day, as if something was about to break. It happened just after sunset. The Afghan sky had turned purple when the first rocket slammed into the perimeter. The explosion shook the ground, alarms screamed, and the loudspeakers roared one word that froze blood: "Incoming! Incoming!" Was in the supply shed finishing an inventory. The blast ripped the ceiling open, smoke pouring in. She grabbed her helmet, her rifle, and sprinted through the haze toward the nearest bunker. Inside, Marines shouted over the thunder of impacts. Tracer fire lit the ridges. Machine guns barked from the towers, returning fire in bursts of discipline. Mortars fell like hammers, shaking the earth. Dust rained down with every strike. The base had become a battlefield. Corporal crouched beside her, sweat streaking his face even in the chaos. He glanced at her, smirk sharp despite the danger. "Try not to cry when the real bullets start flying." She didn't reply. Her rifle braced against the slit, her eyes scanning the ridges. Breath slowed, heartbeat steady. Shapes moved among the rocks, crawling forward. She called out the direction and distance. Fired. Her shots cracked across the desert, cutting down shadows before they reached the wire. For the first time, turned toward her with no insult on his lips. Surprise flickered in his eyes. The assault came in waves. Rockets, mortars, gunfire rattling the walls. The air stank of smoke and sweat and burning fuel. Then came the new sound, an engine roaring closer. Headlights pierced the smoke. A truck barreled toward the main gate, steel plates welded to its body, shrugging off bullets like rain. Every weapon turned on it, rifles, machine guns, even sniper fire. Sparks bounced, rounds pinged, but it didn't stop. VBIED, someone screamed, a vehicle-borne bomb. If it reached the gate, dozens would die. The blast would rip a hole wide enough for fighters to pour in. Iron Creek would fall. Saw it, a weakness. One crude steel plate near the front wheel hung loose, exposed. It was small, but it was enough. She broke cover. "Carter, get back here." His voice cracked behind her. She didn't stop. Bullets chewed the sand at her boots as she sprinted for the weapons cache near the sandbags. Her hands seized the cold metal of an RPG launcher. She dropped to one knee, braced, aimed. The truck swerved, bouncing over craters, engine howling like a beast. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of her grip. One shot, just one. The rocket screamed into the night. Flame carved across the desert. It struck just behind the driver's cabin. The explosion tore the truck apart in a fireball that lifted steel into the sky. The blast ripped outward, flattening everything in its path. Was too close. The shockwave hurled her backward, her body crashing into the wall, helmet flying. Shrapnel slashed her face, blood pouring down her temple, her vision blurred. The world spun. Voices shouted. Hands grabbed her, lifting her onto a stretcher. Boots pounded as they carried her away. Behind them, fire lit the desert, the wreckage of the truck burning like a pyre. "Don't let her die," the commander roared. "She just saved Iron Creek." The words echoed through the smoke as darkness closed around her. She woke to the sound of helicopter blades beating against the night. Her body limp on the stretcher, blood soaking the bandages. Medics shouted over the roar, working furiously, their hands pressing down, voices sharp with urgency. Then the blackness swallowed her again. Days later, she opened her eyes in Germany. Bright lights, blurred faces, pain that came in waves. Her left shoulder bound tight, her legs stitched, her body carved with staples and scars. And on her face, a wound that no surgeon could erase. A scar stretching from temple to jawline, sharp and unhidden. They told her she had survived, but survival had changed her. The war had taken something she could never give back, and when she returned home, she would learn that the battles waiting there were of a different kind. Why did silence cut deeper than shrapnel? Carter woke under the white ceiling lights of Walter Reed Army Medical Center, her body stitched together but broken in ways no doctor could repair. Her shoulder was bound tight, her legs with staples. But it was her face that drew every gaze, a jagged scar that carved from her temple to her jawline. Even after careful surgery, it would never vanish. At first the visits came. Marines from Iron Creek stood at her bedside, thanking her with quiet voices. Some left tokens, a patch, a coin, a folded note that said, "You saved us." For a while she believed that gratitude might carry her through, but gratitude is fleeting. By the end of the first month, the visits slowed. Faces she knew didn't appear anymore. The corridor whispers began. Scarface. The name cut through the air in tones too casual to be anything but cruel. She overheard it in passing. "Probably her fault for standing too close to the truck," one Marine muttered. Another replied, "Lucky she survived it all." She clenched her fists, but said nothing. It was easier to limp back to her room in silence, easier than letting them see the fire in her chest. Yet every insult pressed deeper than the shrapnel still lodged in her arm. The cafeteria was worse. There the whispers grew bolder. One day, as she carried a tray toward an empty table, a Marine called out across the room, "Hey, Scarface, did you run or did you fight?" Laughter erupted around him. The sound echoed like rifle fire. Stopped, she turned, set her tray on their table and looked them in the eye. Her voice was calm, steady. "I didn't run, I fired. That truck never reached you because of me. If you want to know about VBIEDs, ask me. If you want a joke, do it outside." The room froze. No one answered. She picked up her tray and walked away. The cafeteria buzz returned, quieter now, but the sting lingered. Respect hadn't been earned. Not yet. Weeks later, she tried to share her story in a therapy session. A circle of chairs, bright lights overhead, a counselor urging honesty. When her turn came, spoke quietly about Iron Creek, about the truck rushing the gate, about the fire. Before she could finish, a corporal laughed. "You just got lucky," he scoffed. "Don't act like some hero." A ripple of chuckles followed. The sound shattered her resolve. She stood abruptly and left. In the empty hallway, the tears came fast, unstoppable. She pressed her hand against the wall, her chest shaking. For months she had endured pain in silence, but this cut was deeper. That night she called home. Her grandfather's voice crackled across the line, steady as ever. "Talk to me." "They call me Scarface," she whispered. "They think I was reckless. Maybe I don't belong anymore." Her words trembled like glass. His reply came with no hesitation. "Strength isn't about scars fading. It's about standing again after the fall. You've done it before. You'll do it again." She closed her fist around his silver coin, pressing it until the edges dug into her skin. His words became steel in her chest. The next morning she rose before dawn. The hall outside was silent, the air sharp with antiseptic. She walked to the gym, her scar catching the fluorescent light. Master Sergeant Reed was waiting, arms crossed. He had lost a leg years earlier, but he carried himself with unshaken command. "You ready to work?" he asked. She nodded, no excuses. Training was merciless. Every pull-up tore at her injured shoulder. Every lap around the track burned her lungs. She fell in mud, pushed through rain, gasped through pain. And yet she didn't stop. Sweat soaked her hair before sunrise. Her body screamed, but her will held. Progress came slow. One more repetition. One fewer pause. One lap faster. The other wounded began to notice. Some joined her, drawn by the quiet fire that wouldn't die. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than any word. Still, not everyone respected her. Some of the younger Marines snickered when she passed, eyes darting to the scar that marked her face. This time she didn't look away. She met their gaze unflinching. The scar was no longer a mark of shame. It was proof she had stood her ground. What she didn't know was that word of her resilience, and of the cruelty she endured, had begun to rise through the ranks. And somewhere, a general with a reputation for justice had already taken notice. But for each day remained a battle, not against insurgents or bombs, against whispers, against doubt, against herself. And though her body bore wounds that would never fully heal, she had not yet decided whether her spirit would rise again or break under the weight of scars that no one seemed willing to forgive. Why did the cold morning feel heavier than combat? Frost glazed the track outside Walter Reed, the grass brittle under boots. Marines gathered along the fence line, their breath steaming in the November air, their whispers curling like smoke. Bets passed in low voices. Some smirked, expecting failure. Others just watched, silent, curious. This was the day of Carter's evaluation. Months of pain, sweat, and stubbornness had led her here. If she failed, her career ended in the shadow of a scar. She stood before the pull-up bar, gloves tightened, jaw set. 10 repetitions minimum. No excuses. Her grandfather's coin pressed against her palm, a weight she carried into every fight. She exhaled slowly and jumped to the bar. The first 5 came steady, muscles coiled with memory. At 7, her arms began to shake. At 9, her vision blurred. By 10, her whole body quaked. She locked her teeth, rose one more time, chin clearing the bar. Silence fell across the crowd. She dropped to the ground, breath ragged, sweat beading her brow. Whispers spread. She had passed. Next was the run. 3 miles stretched under a pale sky. Her legs carried her forward, stride after stride. Boots pounded behind her, Marines trying to match her pace, but she didn't falter. Her breaths came sharp and even, clouds dissolving into the cold. She crossed the finish line almost 2 minutes under the requirement. Some Marines looked away, unsettled. Others nodded, quietly impressed. Even Corporal, watching from the back, said nothing. Then came the unexpected order. Casualty evacuation drill, an officer barked. A stretcher appeared, a weighted dummy strapped down. Smoke canisters popped, sirens blared, artificial explosions cracked the air. It was chaos designed to mimic war. Seized the front handle without hesitation. 2 younger Marines grabbed the sides. Left steady, eyes forward, move, she commanded. Mud sucked at their boots, her shoulders screamed with every step, but she didn't break stride. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp, steady. The stretcher jolted across the ground, through smoke, through fire, until they crossed the line. They dropped the dummy at the marker. Fell to one knee, chest heaving, vision swimming. The observing colonel gave a curt nod. Noted. His tone carried weight. She had passed. That afternoon she walked into the conference room. The long table gleamed under harsh lights, 5 senior officers seated in silence. Among them sat Major General Collins. Had never seen her before, but her presence filled the room, calm, commanding, sharp as steel. Colonel Price, head of the panel, began in a voice that carried no warmth. This board is convened to determine your fitness for continued service. The questions came one after another, blunt, unforgiving. The medical officer pressed about her injuries. Could she carry full combat load? Could she climb, march, endure? The personnel chief asked about optics. Would her scar affect the core image? Would her future be limited? The combat veteran leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You've seen trauma in battle. How do we know you won't freeze when it happens again? Her reply was steady. Sir, I didn't freeze when a truck full of explosives charged my base. I won't freeze when Marines need me again. The senior enlisted advisor asked the last question. You've been mocked for your scars. How do you plan to face that if it continues? Her answer came without pause. I don't ask for lowered standards. I don't ask for sympathy. Respect is earned by performance, and I'll prove it every day. They dismissed her. She walked out, heart pounding, her grandfather's coin pressed tight in her hand. Behind the door, debate erupted. The medical officer doubted her long-term health. The personnel chief muttered about public image. But General Collins rose, her voice slicing through the air. I saw her mocked in front of her peers, she said. I saw her respond with composure, with dignity, with courage. That is leadership. She is not a liability. She is exactly what the Corps needs. The room fell silent. The balance shifted. When was called back, Colonel Price read the decision aloud. Lance Corporal Carter, this board finds you fit for continued military service. No restrictions, no limitations. Relief surged through her chest. Her eyes burned, but she kept her bearing. Before she could speak, Collins leaned forward, her voice firm. There is one more matter. The room cleared until only the 2 of them remained. Collins stepped closer, eyes unflinching. I'm launching a new program, Wounded Warrior Advocacy. It will fight discrimination and give Marines like you a voice. I want you on my team. You'll travel to bases, speak to Marines, and help change this culture. Hesitated. She had dreamed of returning quietly to her unit to blend back into the ranks, but this was larger, heavier. Why me? She asked softly. Because you've lived it, Collins answered. Because you turned mockery into resolve. Because strength isn't hiding scars, it's carrying them. Drew a long breath. Her shoulders straightened. I'll do it. If I can spare one Marine what I endured, it's worth it. Collins extended her hand. Outstanding. Welcome to the fight. Their handshake sealed it. For the first time since Iron Creek, Carter felt a new kind of mission settling in her chest, one not fought with rifles or rockets, but with truth. And yet, even as the decision set her future on a new course, doubt lingered like a shadow. Could she really stand before others and tell them scars were strength, when she still felt the sting of whispers every night in the silence of her room? What if the hardest battle wasn't fought with weapons at all? The orders came swift, crisp, sealed with the authority of General Collins herself. Carter wasn't returning to a unit. Not yet. Instead, she was stepping into a role she had never imagined: wounded warrior advocacy. A program born to fight discrimination, to give voices to the silenced, to turn scars into strength. Her first reaction was unease. She had trained her whole life to carry weight on her back, to push her body through fire and fatigue. But speaking, standing in front of other Marines and telling them her story, that was a battlefield with no rifle, no cover, no way to hide behind silence. The first assignment came within weeks. A hall packed with Marines, rows of uniforms stiff in their seats. Some skeptical, some curious, others barely hiding their smirks. The air buzzed with tension, the same kind she had felt in cafeterias when whispers chased her steps. She stepped onto the stage, her scar catching the light. For a moment she froze. The words she had rehearsed scattered like ash. She could hear her grandfather's voice in her head, steady as ever. Strength isn't about scars fading. It's about standing again after the fall. So she began, not with speeches, not with grand declarations, just the truth. She told them about Iron Creek, the night sky torn apart by rockets, the truck charging the gate. She told them about the RPG on her shoulder, the explosion, the pain that never left her body. And then she told them about Walter Reed, the whispers, the names, the nights she nearly broke. The hall fell silent, even the smirks faded. When she stepped down, a young private limped forward, his right arm ending at the wrist. His voice shook. "I thought I was finished," he whispered, "but you showed me scars aren't endings." Without hesitation, pressed her grandfather's coin into his hand. "It carried me. Now it's yours." Tears filled his eyes. He closed his fist around it like it was life itself. In that moment, she understood. Her voice could reach further than her silence ever had. But not everyone welcomed her. At bases across the country, she stood before audiences where whispers still followed. Some Marines avoided her gaze. Others muttered in the back, mocking in low tones. She heard them, every word. Yet she didn't flinch. She stood, scar unhidden. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every Marine who carried wounds the world didn't see. Between speeches, she trained. The gym still echoed with her determination. Pull-ups, runs, resistance bands tearing against her shoulder. Pain was constant, but pain was familiar. At night, alone in her quarters, doubt still crept in. Could one Marine really change a culture that mocked its own? Could she fight a battle this vast without breaking? General Collins visited one evening, finding her on the track under dim lights, sweat dripping as she pushed through another lap. "You're doing more than you know," the general said quietly. "They may not say it, but they hear you, and one day they'll follow." Nodded, though part of her still wondered. Change was slow, too slow. Then came the day that shifted everything. A Marine she had never met, Sergeant, a combat veteran with burns covering half his body, approached her after a session. His voice was low, hesitant. "For months, I thought I didn't belong. You reminded me I do. You reminded me this uniform isn't about the face we show. It's about the ground we hold." He saluted her, not out of formality, out of respect. The moment left her standing in silence, her throat tight, eyes burning. Respect wasn't demanded. It wasn't begged. It was earned piece by piece through scars carried openly. Her mission had changed, but it was no less a battlefield. Each speech was a firefight against ignorance. Each handshake a bridge built over silence. Each scar, hers or someone else's, a banner that refused to fade. And though the whispers still followed, though doubt still crept in the dark, Carter walked forward, scar unhidden, voice unshaken. because she had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't across the wire. It was inside the walls, inside the silence, inside the doubt. And this, too, was a fight she would not quit. Why did her words matter more than her weapon ever had? The months that followed tested Carter in ways no battlefield ever had. She no longer carried a rifle slung across her shoulder. Instead, she carried a story, a scar, a truth that made some lean forward in silence and others turn away in discomfort. She traveled from base to base, from conference rooms to gymnasiums, her voice reaching Marines who bore wounds too deep for bandages. At camp, she faced her hardest audience yet. Rows of young Marines sat stiff, some whispering, some rolling their eyes as she walked in. She could feel the weight of their doubt pressing against her scar. She began anyway. Her words cut through the noise, not sharp but steady. She told them of fire tearing through Iron Creek, of the truck that carried death, of the blast that carved her face. She told them about the nights at Walter Reed when laughter at her expense was louder than the explosions she had survived. Silence followed. Then one Marine stood up, tall and unflinching. His voice carried across the hall. "Why should we listen to you? You're not on the line anymore. You talk, we fight." The question hit harder than any mortar, steadied her breath. "Because I was on the line," she answered. "Because I fired when no one else could. And because scars don't end your fight, they just change the way you carry it." The Marine didn't respond. He sat down slowly. The hall stayed quiet, not won, not lost, just listening. Word of her speeches spread higher than she knew. Some leaders praised her, saying her voice inspired resilience in wounded Marines. Others dismissed her, calling her program unnecessary, a distraction from combat readiness. She became a point of debate in rooms she never entered. The pressure mounted one winter morning when she was summoned to a meeting with senior officers. The air was thick with formality, the walls lined with flags. A colonel spoke bluntly. "Your speeches are good for morale, Carter, but morale doesn't win wars. Marines with scars need to learn to accept limits, not pretend they don't exist." The words stung, but she kept her face still. Before she could reply, General Collins cut in, her voice steady but fierce. "Limits are real, but so is resilience. Carter isn't pretending. She's proving that survival isn't weakness." The debate ended there, but the message lingered. Understood, her fight wasn't just in front of audiences. It was behind doors, in decisions made by men and women who doubted that scars could stand for strength. Her chance to prove otherwise came sooner than expected. During a training exercise in the mountains, a Humvee slid off a narrow path, tumbling into a ditch. The Marines inside were trapped, one with a crushed leg, another pinned by twisted steel. Medics scrambled, but panic rippled through the unit. The road was unstable, the vehicle threatening to roll further with every shift. Was there as an observer, her role to speak, not to act, but instinct took over. She dropped to the ground, shouting commands sharp and clear. "Stabilize the frame, secure the line, lift on my count." Her hands gripped the metal, her shoulders screaming with every pull. Together, they hauled the Marines out, dragging them clear just as the Humvee groaned and tipped further into the ditch. When it was over, sweat poured down her face, her breath ragged. The Marines stared at her, some wide-eyed, some ashamed. One whispered almost to himself, "Scarface just saved us." The word no longer cut. It carried something else now: respect. That night, sitting alone beneath the stars, thought about the irony. She had been sent to speak, to advocate, to tell stories. But it was action, the same grit that had carried her through every battlefield, every insult, every scar, that reminded them who she was. She understood then. Advocacy wasn't about choosing words over action. It was about showing that scars didn't end a Marine's worth. It was about proving it over and over in every way possible. And as she pressed her grandfather's coin into her palm, feeling its worn edges dig into her skin, she realized something deeper. Her battle was no longer for herself. It was for every Marine who sat in silence, doubting their place. for every whisper that mocked instead of honored. But as her influence grew, so did the resistance. Some leaders feared her voice was changing too much, too fast. Others resented the attention she received. The whispers hadn't vanished. They had only moved higher, quieter, sharper. And Carter would soon find herself tested in a way that no speech, no coin, no memory of Iron Creek could prepare her for. What if the betrayal didn't come from enemies across the wire, but from those wearing the same uniform? By the spring of her second year as an advocate, Carter's name had spread across commands she had never set foot in. Wounded Marines wrote her letters. Young recruits quoted her words in training halls, but so did the whispers. Some senior officers questioned her influence, muttering that she was turning scars into politics, and the resistance she had once felt in cafeterias now lived in conference rooms. The storm broke during a leadership summit in Virginia, was invited to speak before a crowd of officers, sergeants, and unit commanders. She walked to the stage in her immaculate uniform, scar unhidden, voice steady. She spoke about resilience not as an idea, but as a lived reality. She spoke of Iron Creek, of Walter Reed, of the nights when whispers nearly drove her into silence, and of the fire that had carried her back to her feet. The room was hushed when she finished. Then a colonel rose. His voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet. "Lance Corporal Carter, are you suggesting that every Marine with a scar, with a limp, with a wound should expect to stay in uniform indefinitely? Are you telling us weakness is strength?" A ripple of approval passed through part of the audience. It was the question they had waited for, the challenge that might finally silence her. His chest tightened. For a moment doubt threatened to rise the same way it had when they first called her Scarface. But she steadied herself, lifted her gaze, and answered slowly. "No, sir. I'm saying scars don't erase worth. I'm saying resilience doesn't vanish when the body breaks. Weakness is hiding. Strength is standing anyway." Her words hung in the air. Some nodded, some frowned. The colonel sat down, but the battle wasn't over. 2 weeks later, she learned the cost. A memo circulated quietly through command channels, suggesting that her advocacy program had grown disruptive, that her presence risked misleading expectations among the wounded. She wasn't supposed to see it, but she did, and the betrayal cut deep, not from enemies, from her own. That night she sat in her quarters, the coin heavy in her palm, her scar burning under the dim light. For the first time in months, tears welled. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong. But memory fought back. The laughter in Walter Reed, the young private clutching her coin, the sergeant with burns who told her she reminded him he belonged, and deeper still her grandfather's voice, steady as a drumbeat. Strength isn't about scars fading. It's about standing again after the fall. She wiped her tears, stood, and went back to work. The turning point came weeks later, during a crisis that unfolded far from podiums and memos. A Marine training accident spiraled into disaster. A fire in a barracks wing left dozens injured, smoke choking the halls. Arrived with Collins, who had rushed to oversee the response. Amid the chaos, wounded Marines gathered in shock, some refusing treatment, ashamed of their burns and injuries, already whispering that they were finished. Didn't wait for orders. She climbed onto a table in the smoking mess hall, her uniform streaked with ash. Her voice rose, raw but steady. "Look at me," she shouted, scar catching the glow of emergency lights. "You think you're finished. I stood where you are now. I thought the same, but scars don't end you. They prove you fought. They prove you're still here." The hall fell silent. Medics paused. Marines lifted their heads. One by one, those who had turned away from help began stepping forward. Slowly, but they came. General Collins stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She didn't intervene. She didn't need to. The proof was unfolding before her. His voice wasn't disruption. It was survival. The next morning, the memo that had whispered against her program vanished from circulation. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Collins never mentioned it, but when she passed in the corridor, she gave a single nod. Quiet, certain, approval wrapped in silence. That night, alone under the stars, finally let herself breathe. Betrayal had cut her, but it hadn't broken her. And as she pressed the coin to her palm, she realized something profound. Her strength was no longer borrowed from her grandfather, or given by generals, or even proven on battlefields. It was hers, tested, unbreakable. And though the fight was far from over, though whispers still lingered in corners, she knew now that her voice had become something impossible to ignore. Why did dignity weigh more than the medals gleaming on every chest around her? The hall was filled with rows of uniforms, each ribbon a silent reminder of battles fought and endured. Generals, colonels, sergeants, their eyes followed Carter as she walked slowly to the podium. The scar running from her temple to her jawline caught the harsh light above, impossible to ignore, impossible to disguise. She had chosen not to hide it, not anymore. Her boots echoed across the floor, a rhythm steady enough to hide the pounding in her chest. She wasn't carrying a rifle, not tonight. Her weapon was her voice, and the battlefield was a room filled with decision-makers who could dismiss her with a glance, or listen and never forget her. She paused, inhaled, and looked at them. Some faces leaned forward, expectant. Others leaned back, guarded, skeptical. She spoke anyway. "You asked me here to speak about resilience," she began, her tone measured, low. "But resilience isn't a speech. It isn't a slogan. It's a weight. And every one of us here has carried it, whether we admit it or not." She let the words settle. No one moved. "For me," she continued, "resilience was the silence of Walter Reed's hallways when whispers cut deeper than shrapnel ever could. It was the cafeteria where laughter followed me louder than the alarms at Iron Creek. It was the night I almost believed I was finished, until I remembered that scars aren't shame. They're proof." Her scar caught the light as she spoke the word. She saw a few eyes flinch, but no one looked away. She told them about the desert, about Iron Creek, about the sirens that split the night sky, the truck roaring toward the gate, the RPG steady on her shoulder, about the fire that swallowed the night and the pain that nearly took her life. She told them how survival had carved its mark into her face, a mark that no surgery could erase. She told them about Walter Reed, about the visits that stopped, the gifts that gathered dust, the names that stuck harder than bandages. Scarface, Lucky, Reckless. About the night she walked out of a therapy circle in silence, tears breaking only when the hallway was empty. And then she told them about the coin, her grandfather's coin, how she held it in the worst moments until the edges bit her skin, how his voice steadied her across the miles. Strength isn't about scars fading, it's about standing again after the fall. The room stayed silent, not hostile, not dismissive, silent in the way of men and women who knew what it meant to carry their own scars, visible or not. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharpened. "I'm not saying scars make us invincible. I'm not saying wounds don't matter, they do. But worth isn't erased by what breaks us. Worth is proven in how we rise. Weakness is hiding. Strength is standing anyway." Her last words landed like a hammer dropped in the quiet. She could feel the shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of doubts they had carried. Others sat taller, as if her words had unlocked something buried deep. General Collins rose from her seat. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. She simply stood with her hands clasped behind her back, gaze steady on. Her voice carried across the hall like a blade through fog. "This is the Marine Corps we fight for. Not unscarred, not unbroken, but unwilling to quit." No one spoke after that. No one needed to. When it ended, stepped down from the podium, her chest tight with something deeper than relief. It wasn't victory. It wasn't triumph. It was steadiness. The knowledge that she had spoken not for herself, but for every Marine who had sat in silence, doubting their worth because of a scar no one else wanted to see. That evening she walked outside alone. The night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of the city beyond the base. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the coin. Its edges were worn smooth now, The metal dulled from years of palms that had held it in moments of fear, resolve, and faith. She thought of her grandfather, of the quiet pride in his eyes at her graduation. She thought of the young private who now carried his own coin, clutching it like a lifeline. She closed her fist around it and tilted her head back toward the stars. Her scar caught the fading light of the horizon, sharp and unhidden. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to cover it, or explain it, or fight against it. She finally understood. Scars were not the end of her story. They were the language of it, proof that dignity doesn't have to shout. It simply stands. And under that silent sky, Carter stood, steady, unbreakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.